Thank you. So I'm going to kind of start off by doing a few apologies. Number one, the original presentation that I was going to be doing was going to be geared towards pregnancy clinics. We were going to do it as an advanced education class so they could get their annual certifications. And so most of the slides that we originally did were very specific on how they could do things. So I pulled a lot of it out, and we're going to freelance a little bit more of this. The second thing I'm going to tell you is that most of what I say seems very confrontational and controversial. I do not come from the ministry side of the pro-life movement. I did not come by it naturally, and the third thing I'm going to apologize for, and something I always like to admit to, is although I was brought up Catholic and everything else, I've never considered myself a very good Catholic or Christian. The reason why is I was always taught as a young boy that you did not pray to have things happen or be manifested, right? And so you didn't ask God for things. What you did is you prayed on a continuous basis and thanked him for whatever you had at that time and for the opportunities were given to you, and it was your job to make those things happen, right? Which is very different than a lot of ministries, especially the last 3 years that I've been working with the organizations, because it's been very tough for them to deal with me because I'm very black and white numbers based. I come from the business side of the world. My wife calls me a firefighter. You know, for 18 years, companies would throw me into places where there were problems and said, fix it or sell it. And so I look at things that way. And although the ministry side is very important, to me that was always secondary. Because if the ministry or the organization doesn't exist, they can't have the ministry. One of the first things I said, my very first day hired as the COO of Iowa Right to Life to our current executive director, she goes, every day I come in to save babies. And I said, that's not your job. I said, your job is to make sure this organization functions and have everybody else in your ministry help save the babies. You save them by making sure that we stay afloat. And at that point, they were $600,000 in debt. And then within 9 months, we got them up right side up by changing the philosophy that we did. And now they are positive on cash flow. They are doing a lot more ministry than they ever had. And as we talked about earlier, we've been very successful, not only as an individual organization, but as a state. So the reason I'm saying that is as I'm going through this, it's going to seem like I'm challenging a lot of the things that I've heard discussed over here the last couple of days, but I don't believe you can fix anything unless you're honest with yourself. So one of the first things I want us to be honest about is, A, we are never going to stop abortions, all right? Now, that doesn't mean that we can't stop abortions from being legal, but from as far back in time as you can go, there have always been abortions. Now, if we can realize that paradigm shift, then we can change our strategies in what we do. Now, because hopefully, God will help us get to the point where we end legal abortion in the United States. Most organizations, if you ask them what they will do when Roe versus Wade gets overturned and abortion is illegal, they don't know. They don't have a plan on what they're going to do next, right? Which is why I believe a lot of organizations are scared sometimes to stand in the forefront and challenge everything, because those questions in the back of my mind about, what do I do? What's my job going to be? What's going to be on there is always in the back. That fear is there, all right? But the clinics will always have a job, right? The clinics and some of the ministries we do, even when abortion becomes illegal, our job is to be there and provide safe women's health care and life-affirming care to those women that are still potentially going to be looking for methods to have abortions. Right? And so our role becomes more and more important. So I'm going to give you a real quick history of myself so you can kind of understand. How many people here believe in God moments? Just points in time where things just happen. Okay. So again, I told you I never consider myself a very good Christian, but I've had a lot of God moments in my life to get me here today. All right. So I was brought up by a single mother. I had myself and my sister. And it was a complete matriarchal family. It was my mom, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. We had no men in my family. All of them had passed away well before I was even born. As part of that, it was a very interesting dynamic to be in a household full of women and be the only male as part of that, because there was always a challenge to step up, make sure you protected your sister, make sure you do the right thing. I went through, I had my family. The day I graduated high school, the expectation of my family was that I did not go to college. I had to serve 3 years in the military. I come from a Hispanic family. Now, I like to say that because we grew up in Texas, and back then, being Hispanic was not necessarily the best thing. And so my great-grandmother, who lived to be 115, only spoke Spanish and spoke no English. My grandmother spoke mostly Spanish and a little English. My mom's generation understood Spanish and spoke it, but 90% of the time only spoke English, and we were forbidden to learn to speak Spanish, right? And that was because they were worried about all the the repercussions and things like that would happen, you'd grow up with if you were Spanish. So but they were very proud about being Americans. So every male in my family, when they graduate high school, they are expected to serve 3 years in the military, no exception. And then once you finish that, you can go do whatever you want. So I did like a good son, and I went and joined the military. And I had, I went in, and I didn't plan on doing anything interesting. I went into infantry, and I did my testing, and I tested high enough that they wanted me to go to West Point. So I was like, oh, that's interesting, but I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm not good enough. I declined. So my testing also, interestingly enough, put me in a situation that they wanted me to go special operations. So I did decide to go to that school, and after a year's worth of training, I became a Green Beret. And I served 8 years in the United States military with 7 Special Forces Group and 12 Special Forces Group. And thank you. Now, that was my first God moment, because here's this person that didn't necessarily believe that I was supposed to do anything special, but I found out what my talent was spotting specific instances or situations and coming up with solutions very quickly to do it. So not only was I an infantryman, but I was a tactician. And they put me through an extra school to learn computers so I could actually go through simulations on computers and run scenarios and everything else. And I actually served in 4 different combat zones. I was in Central and South America. I spent time in Johannesburg, South Africa during its uprising, the Sinai Peninsula, and most of my time was over there with joint groups, joint task forces, coming up with military situations. 8 years later, I was given the ability to go out and actually do a warrant officer training at Stanford University. So I decided, okay, maybe I'll go ahead and do it, and I got out. I served, this was towards the end of the Gulf War, and I did 3 weeks at the university and got a part-time job at a company called CompUSA. Does anybody remember them? Largest computer superstore in the United States. And I kind of fell in love with the coding side of things, and I also kind of fell in love with video games. Weird. Video games were becoming a very popular thing back then. And at that point, video games, you can play only one person against another person. It was called peer-to-peer in a single system across a modem, right? And I was coding, and I met a bunch of the gamers, and I had another moment where somebody said, hey, it would be cool if a bunch of people could play in the same room and challenge each other, and we could do competitions. So I sat down, and I decided to try to code it. And that next year, we ran the first LAN party in which we had 1,500 people playing against each other in a video game system. And that software that I wrote became network software that is now used today to run massive LAN tournaments and communication, and also is the basis of a lot of the multiplayer games that are going on now. Now, after that happened, I got promoted to a senior vice president at CompUSA because they wanted to buy the software for me, and that was my next moment, which is they they wrote me a check for $14 million in order to buy the stuff that I had. Believe it or not, I lost all that money. But anyway, I was young and there were things. But but it was interesting because once again, it was a young kid that was just not feeling like he necessarily needed to do anything, but I saw a problem, someone threw it at me, and I decided to go with it. CompUSA got sold to a mega corporation called Grupo Sanborn, second richest man in the world. Carlos Slim bought it, and I got to work for Carlos Slim and Carlos Slim Jr. I did 3 years at that corporation doing international transfer stuff for them and got hired by Rupert Murdoch and his son to go work for News Corp and got a $50 million budget to try to help bring media products into China, Singapore, Malaysia, Southeast Asia in general. And then from there, I ended up going to a company called DMA Holdings, in which my job was to go over, assess companies, and buy international companies and change them over. One of them is the parent company for WhatsApp that currently is owned by Facebook. The reason I'm kind of going through all this is because 2 years ago, the company I was working for, we did a little over $1 billion deal. My boss said, hey, I'm going to give you a year off, and I want you to go home and rest, because I was spending at that point 9 months out of every year out of country. And go spend some time with your daughters and everything else. And I spent that time with my daughters, and that's how I got into the pro-life movement. Is my wife was saying, your girls are getting older, things are kind of getting risky, they're good girls, but we're concerned you need to get more active. And up to that point, I was a check writer. And I said, okay, that's interesting. 8 months into it, my daughters came to me and said, hey, is there a way that you could stay home and not go back to corporate America? And I said, okay. And that's when Iowa Right to Life was looking for someone to try to figure things out. We were having problems in Iowa. And I took a 90% pay cut and decided to go with Iowa Right to Life. And I said I'd commit the next 3 years of my life to doing this, and I'd go back to corporate. Now, interestingly enough, the first thing I did, this is the hating moment, is I took the top 10 organizations in the state of Iowa, and I did an assessment and said, I'm going to do a business assessment of you as a business. And as part of that business assessment, I am going to give you an honest assessment of why you guys are losing money, where you are, how you stand, and how we might be able to fix things. And they said, okay. And I looked at it and I said, wow, the market is oversaturated. There's a lot of organizations all asking for the same funds. That you guys are being eaten alive by the new groups that are coming in, which are the clinics, which can actually give a metrics. They can show the dollar that's being donated and actually how it's resolving a situation. So it's hard to get money from the other side, which is the ministry, the education, and everything else, because you're asking for money every year, but you can't show if you've actually moved the bar, right? And then I said, and the third thing is you guys are all fighting each other. You spend more time arguing with each other on strategy that you guys have gotten nothing accomplished. So we were talking about the coalition. So I was told none of the organizations would work with each other. And so I own a restaurant in Iowa, the oldest restaurant in Iowa. And I invited all of them there independently and didn't tell them the others were coming. So I have the top groups around the room. It's Family Leader, it's Personhood, it's Iowa Right to Life. These guys have not talked for years. They do not like each other. And I said, okay, you guys don't know me. I'm the outsider, so I'm going to give you the same assessment I gave the corporation. Is A, 40 years and you guys have not moved the football down the field 10 yards. You guys have made no significant changes in the pro-life movement in 10 years. All right, 40 years. Number two, I pulled all of your annual receipts, because it's all public information, and in the last 10 years, you have raised $18 million and gotten nothing done. Now, and I said, now, based on those two things alone, and being a corporate guy, if you asked me to invest in your movement or your company, I would say, A, you guys have a bad product. Nobody believes in what you're doing, but we know that's not true. Number two is you don't know how to market your product. Or three, you should all be fired because you're lousy executives. all right? And they were all shocked. But they all listened. And I said, what I would propose that you do, give me a year to 2 years. We all are going to work together, and we are going to go to the next legislative cycle, and we are going to take all the things we disagree on and throw out, and we're going to pick the 2 things that we can agree on. And we are going to go up front as a united front. No more mom against dad. No more duplicating money. Everybody has certain skills. I'm not going to market to your people. You're not going to market to my people. We're just going to go up as a single unit. That year, we got state defunding of Planned Parenthood when we got 20 weeks and we got body parts. The first year, all right? So that's okay. So we talked about heartbeat. So we did the same thing the next year, and we got heartbeat passed. No one believed it was possible, and we got it passed. Well, that's when I had my moment of sadness, because the first thing that they did was they took it to court, and they locked us up. Now, Iowa went from the most conservative pro-life state to now, because they've actually stated, because of the Iowa Supreme Court, that there is a constitutional right to an abortion in the state of Iowa, they can now start overturning anything that was passed previous. And we can't even put new law up because there's a constitutional right. That's when I had my second epiphany and how we kind of got here today with the clinics, which is, after 40 years of doing an analysis of all the states, all the situations, look at what's happening currently right now up at the federal level where infanticide is back on the table, right? We can spend a tremendous amount of money every single year, and we keep kind of going through these cycles. And the question became, the most effective group is the clinics as far as getting numbers done. Is there a way to challenge Planned Parenthood and the thing on a business front? Now, when I looked at that analysis, the answer was yes, but then quickly came to the same realization, which is it's never going to happen because they're all ministry-based. Now, that seems like a good thing, but it's not a good thing in the sense that they're only going to work to each other to a certain level. They're never going to have true unification because their basic differences are too different. Right? They've tried to get networks together. You have Heartbeat, you have CareNet, you have Obria, and all of them only seem to be able to grab a small number of organizations because their base strategies and what they're trying to get accomplished, although the end goal is the same, is completely different. So I put that on a whiteboard and said, is there a way to fix this? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a quick analysis of the pro-life pregnancy clinics. All right, so I always hear all the time, and I've heard it several times here today, in the last 2 days, is Planned Parenthood has so much money, and they're so much bigger than we are, and it's really hard for us to defeat them. How many people believe that they're really that big? That they have more money than we do? There's a lot of hands. Okay, so let's go through this. So the first thing you have to do when you assess a business is you need to determine if the current and future needs of a product or service are viable. We know that we need these services, right? That's not even a question here. Number 2 is you have to determine, you and your nearest competitor, what the market share is, and if there's enough market share to take over in order to make the business bigger and more viable, right? So we'll go over that. 3 is you need to evaluate the competitive services and cost, the value proposition in comparison to your competitor. And 4, you need to decide if you can solve those issues that restrict your current growth. All right, so 5 reasons a business fails. Number 1 is you're really not in touch with your customers. Number 2, there's no real difference in the marketing, a lack of a unique value proposition. 3, and this is according to Forbes and several other places, failure to communicate the value proposition in a clear, concise, and compelling fashion. 4, leadership breakdown and disagreement of clear direction or strategy. And 5, inability to nail the business model with proven results and revenue streams. All right? Now, almost all of those, believe it or not, are problems with the pro-life movement. So we're going to go here. Let's take a snapshot of market share. The first thing I want to point out, the statistic company surveyed 10,000 women between 18 and 45 between 2003 and 2018, May of each year, in the United States by phone. And what they found was when they asked them, the question that was asked to them was, do you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice? And if you found yourself in an unplanned pregnancy, which direction would you go? If you look at the statistics from 2004 to 2018, it stays almost consistent at 50% market share. 50%. Okay, now we're going to get to some interesting things. So the first thing you notice is the other side has stayed fairly stable, but in 15 years, we have not been able to really move anybody over to our side. But every dollar I hear that we want to spend is about changing hearts and minds. So my first challenge to you is, are we really trying to change hearts and minds, or are we patting ourselves in the back? Because most of the events that I've gone to in the United States, we're preaching to the choir. The money we're spending is to go into the churches that already agree with us. We're spending money to have events to talk to the people that already believe what we do. And conversion is about getting to the people that are on the other side and moving them over. Now, these are hard statistic data. This isn't me saying, this isn't anecdotal. This is real information. And again, this is where I get into trouble, because I believe in faith. I believe God moves things. But I also believe God gives us the tools to make decisions to actually move things over. Okay, so there's a market share. Okay, so now we're going to take a snapshot of the competitor. You guys are now investors. I'm asking you to look at this objectively on if you think we're using good use of money, and if you would want to invest in the competitor or the company A being us, pro-life groups, if you were to look at these numbers. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is how many locations are we working with? How many people think they know how many locations Planned Parenthood physically still has? Brick and mortar. Yes, ma'am. 600 plus. Very close. Compared to how many life-affirming clinics in the United States? The actual number is 596, but we have 14,124. Okay, that's a 20-to-1 ratio. So for every opportunity that they have, we have 20 opportunities, 20, in order to move that 50% to our side. So my first question is, if you were an investor and you saw that, and you said, in 15 years, you have not been able to move that 50% market share from A to B, when you have 20 more opportunities, what would your answer be? You should either be fired, you don't know how to market, or you don't have a good product. That's what you should. If we took the pro-life out of it, that's what you should be saying. So let's look at the next statistic. So the next statistic is dollars. So I'm going to ask you again, how many dollars do you think Planned Parenthood revenue that they get in annually? Anybody? Okay, that's actually how much federal funds they get. Okay, how much do you think that the pro-life clinics, not all the organizations, just the clinics, bring in on an annual basis? Okay, let's do this. Planned Parenthood brings in $1.3 billion annually. That's across all their things. $560 million of that is just government money. That's what we always tend to talk about, is getting the government money out of their hands. These numbers are from Planned Parenthood's annual report. Okay, but all the clinics in the United States bring in $2.2 billion. $2.2 billion of revenue. And most of that is done in donations. The average clinic has about a $100,000 annual budget, and they bring in a little bit more than that. Some of the bigger clinics have over $1 million budget, but the average is about $202,000 raised every year. If any of you guys are in clinics, now there's the small ones that bring in $50,000, $60,000, but any of you guys, and I've talked with a bunch of the clinics here, even Birthright, and they're like, yeah, that's about right, about $100,000. So 14,000 times the average of 200,000, that's the big ones and the small ones, $2.2 billion. And again, all this information, because they're 501c3s, can be looked up. This is, again, not anecdotal information. This is hard fact. It should scare you, because if I told you the 7,000 pro-life organizations that are also included, if you added that budget in there, we are getting we have so much more money than they do. It's amazing that we aren't getting anything done. So the third statistic, average cost of services. So they charge an average of $125 per person to offer their services. That's, again, an average. Pregnancy tests, $7 to $12, abortions up to $600. So they charge for their services. On average, we offer them for free. So let me ask you, if your competitor had less locations, received less money, and charged, we receive more money, have 20% or 20 to 1 on locations, and we offer our services for free. How are we not winning? I mean, from a business aspect, we should be looking at this and saying, what are we doing wrong? It's just an impossible situation that should happen. So I actually put on here some of the care costs. These are actually from Planned Parenthood site, shows what they charge on average. Now, they will help you make payments. They will, help find services for you if you don't have any income and things like that. But on average, everybody walks out with some sort of fee, even if it's $20 for the admin fee. We offer our services for free. Okay, why can't we get past 50%? Okay, there's the abortion care costs. Okay, so I'm going to get a little closer to home. Here's a snapshot of 5 states. So in Iowa, unfortunately, there's 8 Planned Parenthoods still existing. We have 260 clinics. Our annual birth rate is 39,687, yet we still had 3,700 registered abortions. Now, we have to know chemical, that's not even the real recording number. So the numbers that we're giving are slightly skewed, which means that we have an 8.6 abortion rate overall in the state, and our ratio is 26 to 1. So for every clinic, we have 26 on the opposite side that are life-affirming that we should be able to do that. You can kind of go down the list and look at that. And again, if you do an assessment, I couldn't find really any states, outside a couple in the Dakotas and things like that the ratios weren't significant and we shouldn't be able to be winning on a marketing front, on a general business front. So it keeps going. I kept going back with the question, what is the problem? Why can't we get there? How are we failing when it comes to these really basic things? Now, part of the reason, I believe, is that we are not marketing to the right people. Now, every clinic person here, I will say that some clinics are more successful than others. Some do a fantastic job, all right? But you can always do better, all right? But I personally believe the reason we can't break past 50% is because what we're doing is most of our marketing is geared towards the life-minded. Right? If you are marketing to a young girl and your website is, we will help you do this with your baby. I look at Heartbeat, I look at all the websites and they're so pro-life. But at 15 years old and I'm a girl or I'm a boy, and I find myself in that most critical moment, which I find out I'm pregnant or I believe I'm pregnant, and I'm afraid and I'm in despair and I haven't quite made the decision yet on if I want to keep the baby or not, your marketing should be geared more neutral. What you should be telling them is, what the millennial wants to hear and what Generation Z has to hear is, we're not here to help make a decision now. If they talk about abortion, it's, we need to go ahead and we're here just to help you and listen. They want that neutral, and Planned Parenthood is amazing at it. So I'm going to tell you a true story that happened recently, and this is how I ended up starting this company. So again, I told you I'm Catholic. My middle daughter is 15 years old. Since we moved up to Iowa, she has a best friend, also Catholic, goes to CCD with her. Her dad's a Knight of Columbus with me, family's pro-life, that we all went to the March for Life together. This is a very pro-life young lady. Unfortunately, she thought she was pregnant. Now, we live in a little town, population 800. The town next to us, Creston, is a population of 6,000. We have a clinic there. She did the right thing. She tried to call the clinic. Well, what happened was the clinic was closed on Mondays. And there was an answering machine there, and it said, we are not open today. You can leave a name and number, and someone will get back to you, or call this phone number, and someone will answer immediately. It was the number for the director. She decided not to do it. She hung up the phone. She goes, I'll call tomorrow. She is sitting at home alone. She's scared. She's worried about what her parents are going to think. She gets up on Tuesday, goes to school, comes back, calls on Tuesday. They're closed. 80% of our clinics are not open 7 days a week. Some of them are only open 2 or 3 days. Well, this clinic's only open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So she calls, same scenario. So she hangs up the phone, she's crying. The next thing she did was she called Planned Parenthood. Now, she went down, she had an abortion. She came home, called my daughter, cried. My daughter didn't want to lie to me. She came and got me. I sat down, talked to the girl, said, I'll go talk to your parents with you. We had the conversation. Parents cried, everybody cried, I'd get teared up. And I asked her, I go, I'm a business guy, I have to know what made you do it. I go, you've been to the march, you've had all the conversations, you're part of the club that goes and talks to the girls and helps with the club. She goes, first is, I go, why didn't you leave your name or call? She goes, it's a small town. If I wasn't pregnant, everybody would know that I was being promiscuous when I was in this situation. And I was like, okay. And I said, okay, but then why'd you go to Planned Parenthood? She goes, I didn't go to have an abortion. I called them so I could have a pregnancy test, and I figured I could get in there and get it done, and then I would find out. I had no intention of getting there. But she goes, they told me, it'll be okay. You don't have to make that decision. We offer all services. It'll be okay. We don't make you have an abortion. She goes, by the time I was in there, I didn't know what had happened until I was walking out, and I had made the decision. And she goes, and instantly I regretted it. She felt like God was going to punish her, all this stuff. Now, we work with a group called Operation Outcry, and they're a national program, and they have a stack like this big of women who have had abortions that have regretted it or had situations. And so the stories are out there, and usually the stories are the same. You know, if someone had been there to answer the phone, if someone had been there to talk me through it, not judge me, not ministered to me initially, but just allowed me to talk. Because part of ministry is sometimes soft selling it, letting them come to the conclusion. But we're in such a hurry on our marketing to get them in the door that even if it doesn't seem like a hard sell, it is when you're in crisis. All right? So how do we get, so if you can allow me the latitude of saying, well, maybe he's right. Maybe we're getting the girls. I still think that the clinics do get those girls that are on the fence and saying, but they were probably brought up in an environment and what they're looking for is you say, it'll be okay. We'll get in there. I met the lady from Birthright here, and yesterday she was eavesdropping on this conversation with one of my friends from Personhood and one of the lawyers from Thomas More, and she goes, we're talking about this at Birthright. And I said, why? And she goes, because what we're hearing is, if you want to keep the baby, go to Birthright. But if you don't want to keep the baby, go to Planned Parenthood, right? And she goes, that's our marketing. But we can't market any other way because our charters and the things that we do are Christian values, and we need to put forth that we are pro-life and all this other stuff. So there's a fine line between how edgy you can get and how you can do things and don't. And it's like I said, this is that whole thing, that interconnectivity. And the bigger thing is that all those clinics have inventory that aren't being used. And when I say inventory, we're talking about appointments that could be made. There's some of them are sharing doctors. We're underutilizing them because everybody is independent. The reason we're losing is 14,000 to 500 is every one of those clinics, maybe they have 2 or 3 that are joined in a network, maybe they work with Heartbeat, maybe they do that, but it is not a giant organization that is going forward together and getting things out there. All right, so before I get into a lot of other things, that's where Shepherd's Network Solutions is trying to solve this. All right, and what we want to do is we want to create the first pro-life aggregator system for pro-life services. And what that means, it will be a for-profit company, and what it will do is what Orbitz does, or what Amazon does, which is we are neutral. We don't make you affiliate with us. We are a service provider. What we will do is offer free scheduling software. The second thing is we will get everybody HIPAA compliant, because most clinics by 2021 have to be HIPAA compliant. And most of them cannot afford to be, don't know how to be, and it's cumbersome. Now, all medical clinics in the United States have to be HIPAA compliant, but the federal government has over $18 billion to help them, but we can't touch that money because we're pro-life clinics, and we'd have to accept a bunch of different terms. So we are creating that software. Now imagine this. What happens is a clinic uses our software. It can be used in conjunction with other software. And when and we'll do national marketing that will be more close likely to Planned Parenthood. So their marketing says, real women's health care. And we'll say, real women's health care, but ours is free, right? And you try to mirror what they do. Most clinics have that phone that either they might use Heartbeat, they might use CareNet, but that's a multi-stage system. So you call them and they'll have someone to talk there, but they can't make the appointment. They've got to call the location. If the location is closed, they can call the director and they go through a process and then you pass on the information. At-risk youth should never be told that they have to wait. Planned Parenthood answers the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week first. They talk you through it. They hold your hand. They guarantee you have an appointment. If you have questions, every part of the process, we will do that now. Because if I give you the software, you have the ability to tell me what services you offer. You check a box. What days you have doctors. What services you provide, and then I can set that appointment and send an alert to both your director and the person who does that and tell them you now have an appointment on Tuesday. On top of that, but with geolocating, all I have to ask the girl is, what's the problem, hon, and what's your zip code? And I can pull up that information, because what happens if she can't go on a Tuesday because she's got cheerleading, right? The problem is they have to look and they try to set an appointment and they find out the closest place is closed on a Tuesday, and they can't get to them, they're not going to go and look for a third or a fourth clinic. They're going to Planned Parenthood. There should never be a reason we can't find a spot for them. We can't tell them when they're going to go and do it on their schedule. On top of that, we're working with a couple different groups to fund Lyft. I'm 14 years old. I can't drive. If you will guarantee the appointment, we will send you a Lyft and pick you up at your location, take you, and bring you back to your appointment. And then these groups will reimburse us once we can confirm that they did the appointment. Because we'll be HIPAA compliant, we can help, like, if you're birthright and you don't do ultrasound, what happens? The number one loss of life is when I find out I'm pregnant. I peed on a stick, I did my test, and now you just confirmed my worst fear. And you said, we'll refer you to the next place, and you're trusting them to get there. But you left me alone. Now, our intent isn't to do that, and there's groups that don't, but these kids, okay, the other thing is we always talk about community. Everything is about, we try to change everything in our local community, we try to change everything in our church, right? Again, that ministry is wonderful, and I think it's great. Generation Z lives in a global community. They don't look at the community around them as community. They live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with community without boundaries. The information, my daughter, it drives me crazy. Our priest will go up there and sit there and give a talk and kind of go and make his points, and we'll go through things. And at the end, she'll go, according to the national Catholic Church doctrine, because she doesn't look as the local Catholic Church as her church. To her, it's the entire Catholic Church is her church, because all that access is here, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Planned Parenthood realizes it. We just don't realize it. So I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to run through some things relatively quickly. So we need to understand our current genetic makeup of who is who as we're building this. So baby boomers. So baby boomers are 44 to 64. They're right now 54 to 74. They're the investors and donors, right? They should not be the ones that are making decisions on the infrastructure that we're building for Generation Z. And unfortunately, a lot of our board members are those people. And the decisions that are being made by the group that has no clue on who the next generation is. Generation X, 65 through 79, they're now the investor operators, which is almost as bad, right? There are some of them are investing, but it's people like me who are out there operating it. But until about 3 weeks ago when I started doing this, I didn't realize none of my girls did Facebook, right? And then I went to the school and found out about it and found out 80% of the kids in my daughter's class have never touched Facebook. They don't believe in Facebook. They won't use Facebook. Wall Street Journal, and then I confirmed it, Wall Street Journal yesterday had 3 articles about Zuckerberg, how he's trying to change his privacy policies and change. He owns Instagram and he owns WhatsApp, but he's trying to change the policies there because no one under the age of 30 is on Facebook, and they lost 15 million people. But we're still, all the clinics, they're building their stuff to use Facebook Messenger. And they think that we're advancing. And I'm like, you're spending money going backwards. Again, good intentions, but we're all doing it independently and we're doing the best we can. No one's looking at the future. We're looking at our future. At 54 years old, I think I know the future, but it's not the same as my daughter's. Right? What's going to skip Generation Y, but we're going to talk about Z. Generation Z, 95, right now they're 3 to 23 years old. Those are the people we should be talking to find out what they need. They're the clients. Stop making decisions based on what we think they need and start asking them what they need. I know 3 groups that I talk to here that are in the process of building apps. No one under the age of 20 uses apps, right? Planned Parenthood only has one because they're giving the abortion pill and they need it for telemed. No young girl is going to download an app for her local clinic and let her parents find it and ask about keeping a baby. You're not going to have that. Plus, on top of that, parents have tracking information now. I know every app that my daughter puts on her phone. They're not going to do it. And on top of that, you spend $50,000 to build an app that's going to be used multiple times. If it's a multi-use, then it's useful. But hopefully they're not getting pregnant multiple times. It can happen, but the point is, you only invest that money in something that makes sense. This doesn't make sense. So who is Generation Z? They think in 4D. They're tech innate. They use more than 5 screens at any given time. They're active volunteers. They judiciously share. What that means is, my generation was okay with Google grabbing information. They turn off geolocation because they don't want their parents to find them. They watch the tracking things that they do. They don't share information at the same rate. They know how to go into the privacy things and turn everything off. They make the decision on who they share things with. They communicate with images. Here's an interesting statistic. Every single year, there are more photos taken by Generation Z than all the previous photos of all the years prior. That was the statistic that was done by several institutes when they actually looked at the numbers of photos being taken. Okay. They look at collective consciousness. They only have an 8-second attention span. They believe in global community and they're future focused. On top of that, they're extremely high stressed. They have a high fear of failure. They are overwhelmed, overcommitted, overconnected. They suffer from FOMO, which is fear of missing out, not being part of what's current. And they also fear of being openly judged, which is why our marketing doesn't do its job. Because although we don't feel it's judgy, at that moment, that fear makes them feel like we're going to be judged. Or how am I doing? 1 minute? Okay. So I'm going to do this last thing, which is psychology of fear. So the psychology of fear is connected with our primal response of fight or flight. Your body releases hormones and controls the blood flow. This is important because our biggest fear is death, right? That's important because it's a trait of survival. However, this primitive instinct of survival can change your morals and your actions. Think about my daughter's friend, right? This is what we need to understand when we're dealing with that at-risk person, because they are not making decisions based on morals. They're making decisions on that primitive response. So although we keep thinking that we're getting to them and they have moral values, what we have to understand is that primitive response is what gets to them. Now, I say there's 3 exceptions in the pro-life movement. There's rape, there's incest, and there's me. More people that you talk to that are in the movement have someone they know about that have had that and say, I was surprised when they had that abortion because they always seemed like they were this way. When it happens to me, when it happens to my daughter, when it happens to that primal instinct kicks in. And although they always regret it at the end, that's what we're dealing with at that time. So, If we want to build that market share back the other direction and everything else, we need to find a way to actually look at who the client is, work with them as they need it. We have to understand that it's not always about morals and being biblical and them having those right things around them. Because I've known multiple people in my church and from outside that we have ministered to after the fact, and you're like, I'm surprised I'm having to have this conversation because they were always so pro-life, right? We have to admit those things, and we have to admit that we're fighting battles alone when we should be fighting them together, all right? Now, we're never going to be able to do this independently, which is why we're proposing, and if you guys are interested, we can have a conversation after this about this, of creating a third-party company so no one has to change their values, their strategies, but just like in Orbitz or things like that, it's a third-party method to get things in that seems neutral. You don't have to change anything. And if you get 0 new people, it doesn't cost you anything. But imagine if every clinic in the United States got 10 extra girls a year. 14,000. It's 140,000 girls. That just brought it from 1 million to 900,000. If you got 20 girls a year, if you got 10 a week, right? We're offering them a different method to get in and soft selling it so it doesn't look like we're judging them immediately. So, am I good? All right, I appreciate this. I hope there's lots of questions here. This is a completely different concept that we've dealt with before. Like I said, I hope it didn't seem too harsh when we look at the numbers. I'm not being judgmental, but when you look at the numbers, 40 years if you really look at it, but just in the last 10 years, or even if you just look at last year, the numbers are astronomical. As a business person, I would be ashamed, but we're doing what we can with what we can, but we're fighting a tremendous evil. They put everything out there and they don't stop. They're a business. We have to be a little bit more business-minded because 40 years of legislation and straight ministry has shown we can hold the line, but we're not moving the bar completely over.
Our first question for Scott. Aren't our competitors the media and left-wing influence on government, which is overwhelming competition?
Okay, that's a good question. So I was having this conversation with a couple of the people from Personhood the other day, and we were talking about how the left controls so much of the marketing and the media that we look at on a continuous basis. I call that a cop-out, all right? If we were united and we had all 14,000 organizations working one direction, we could outbuy the media, all right? There are ways, there are companies that are not socially acceptable, but still do very well, take major market shares and control what they do. The problem is when you're factioned, every one of your organizations, and actually I think he's talking about it next door, we already know that we're being shadow banned on Twitter. We're being charged higher prices on Google. But I say you can't blame Google for that. Planned Parenthood buys at a much lower CPM because they buy such large ad buys. Your local clinic's buying 10 radio ads, and you're buying your Google ads at a much smaller base. And so any business is going to be charged more. Is it a little bit of an unfair advantage? Sure, they are charging more than they probably should. But if we had 14,000 clinics all doing one marketing plan and you were just changing the name on it and I said I was going to buy 20 million ads, I guarantee you I could get just as much publicity and everything as everybody else. The great thing about the left is they like to think that they're all social values, but they're just as much about money as everybody else. And you can tell that because there are a lot of right-wing causes. There's just as many gun sales going on. There's all kinds of things that are on there. It's just you have to have the power to buy it. We have the power. We're just all trying to do it independently. The one thing the coalition found was we were duplicating costs. Everyone is buying the same materials, handing out the same babies, going out there and spending the same overhead over and over and over again. And that's what bogs us down. Planned Parenthood does one marketing buy, distribute it's out there. They have one tech crew that does all their updates. It's just shared cost value. So we can say that that's part of the reason, but I've never been a firm believer in that. I believe that if you have the money to spend, you can make it happen. So, yes, sir.
This may be exactly what you were just talking about. Do you think it would be beneficial for pregnancy centers to unite under one name and unified business strategy in order to increase brand recognition, improve business and effectiveness?
Okay. The answer is yes, but it's a pipe dream. Okay. Again, I like to be honest. You will never get Coke and Pepsi to merge. Right? Right? One of the first conversations I got again when I was hired as COO and I did that assessment was that the pro-life movement is very much like religion, right? If I go to a giant room and say, how many people believe in a higher being? Most people would raise their hands. After that, poof, it goes 50 zillion directions. Because then I say, do you believe in God? And then people go, I don't necessarily believe in God. I believe in a higher power, but I don't believe in God. Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God or this? Do you believe, every religion has its own offshoot, and you can all agree in a general principle, but that's about as far as you can go. It's the same thing with this. It's too broad. You're always going to have people that disagree in strategy. You're always going to have difference in mission. It's the reason why none of the organizations who have good causes have ever been able to unite them under one group there, including right to life groups, national right to life. You can pick the groups. It's because we're human, we have ego, we have mission, and they're all different. And at a certain point, you're not going to agree. That's the reason why Amazon works. Why is Amazon successful? Is because they create a white box solution, and whether you're building your stuff in a garage or you're a multinational business, all they see is the store. And everybody else does what they want in the background with a set of rules. That's an aggregator. And that's what I'm proposing, which is take away the stigma of you have to change who you are. Let's just present a storefront of the services we provide in a neutral way and say, we're free, right? We are safe, we give you options, and we get to you and we make sure you're safe from the time you call or text us until you're done making your decision, right? And if you can get them in the door, then you can change their mind and you can minister to them, right? Because that's what we're taught, is it's a progressive thing. Very few people, if you confront them, are gonna move over. Human nature is you put up a wall. We need to knock down that wall.
If,
Planned Parenthood.
yeah, isn't Planned Parenthood much better funded per location? And then isn't that part of their relative success compared to their competition?
Okay, that's a good point. So, yes, but we can change that. Here's the reason why. How many people here are part of the ministry? You either work for a clinic, work for an organization, do volunteer work, anything. Okay. When you tell people what you do, how many people go, I give my time, I volunteer, I work for a nonprofit? How many people describe where they work or what they do as a nonprofit? Okay. 90% of the people in the pro-life movement do. You will never hear that from Planned Parenthood. They work for a corporation. It is a 501c3. 501c3 is a tax status. We operate our businesses and our organizations, like we're martyrs. A lot of the organizations barely have enough money to get through every year. Then we go back to the donors and do that, and we say, we pray for it, we'll get it, we'll make it happen. Every year they have a surplus of cash. They operate it like a business. They do that stuff. We can do the same thing. Some of the most successful clinics that I've talked to, when you look at it, they run it just like a business, right? So when we're looking at that question, and you ask that, they are better funded because they have business operations, they have budgets that they don't oversee, they don't supersede, they know, they do 3-year projections, they know how much they're gonna spend, what's going on. I can go to 10 organizations and say, can you give me your 3-year budget? Most of them will look at me like, what, budget? What are you talking about? This is how much we bring in. This is what we kind of do. We don't operate that way. So we can change the funding method. By doing a third-party company, we can go after money that you guys can't go after because we're a for-profit company. So what we're doing, this white box solution that we're looking at, is we offer these services for free to all the clinics. And what we do is we can go after government funding. There is Title X funds. There are funds out there to get HIPAA compliant, but see, we're not a health clinic. I don't have to meet those standards. What we are is a service provider to help low-cost rural clinics up to standard. And we've already made the calls and checked on that, and we're going, checkbox. Because our clients are life-affirming, but the government can't stop you on who you choose as clients as a for-profit business when you go for grants. But they can stop you as a clinic or a not-profit organization from doing certain things. So again, by flipping this to a for-profit business, and the profits that we do make every year go right back into funding the cost of why you're getting the service for free. We just don't pay out a dividend. Our board members just agree to allow that money to go back into operational costs. So we're more philanthropists as a for-profit business than a nonprofit that has to deal with government standards. So there is a way to go ahead and do it.
So here's a legal question.
Sure.
Are there legal problems of false advertising if a pregnancy center gives the impression they may do abortions?
Okay. So first of all, we'll look at this from 2 perspectives. Is there a legal obligation or any risk to the clinics? No, because the clinics don't have direct contact with the client. We're the go-between. You don't talk to the airlines when you go to orbits. Right? You do that. So theoretically, what we've done is we've created that barrier to entry to block all risk to them because you give us the information, we filter that information, and we put it out there. Secondly, is we don't tell people that we don't do abortions. The soft sell on our 24-hour hotline with the nurses and things like that is they don't necessarily want to be told that they can't have an abortion. They just want to be told that they want to be walked through the process. And the first thing is just to get them on the phone. And that 50% market share is we're not even getting them on the phone because the things that we're putting forward are already starting that confrontational relationship. It's that marketing. Now, I have sat in 4 or 5 call centers that do a remarkable job, and once they get the girl on the phone, they don't even get in that conversation. Come in, hun, we can have the conversation. We don't do abortions here, but let's first find out if you're pregnant. Let's talk through your, and I'm listening, I'm like, oh, these are great, these ladies are amazing, right? The problem is the people aren't even calling. We're not even getting there. That 50% market share, we're not talking about the ones that you guys are saving year in and year out, the 50%. Those numbers aren't gonna change. It's finding a way to get them to do the call in the first place so you can engage that conversation. As Birthright said, what they're hearing is, if you want to keep the baby, go to Birthright. If you don't, you go over here. See, the message is out. We have 40 years of marketing that says we're over here and they're over there. We need to find a way to bridge that a little bit. And again, a for-profit company can do it a little more efficiently because we're never going to affect your ministry, right? We're not going ahead and doing that thing. What we're doing is we're saying we provide a service, call. And then we can do that. And on top of that, we have a better way of filtering because then if we can ask as a third question, does religious do you want it religious or non-religious? And we can check that box. And there's, there are groups that are Catholic or Baptist or Lutheran based and some that say, we don't have, and we can filter those out so the girl is more comfortable. Because if you can get someone where they need to be, you're more likely to convince them on what you're doing. But that doesn't always happen in the current system. So.
Okay, that's it. And actually, our time is up too.
Okay, good.
Let's once again give a round of applause to Scott for the great work he does.